budgeting for the coming year. It's already March 3rd, 2026. And when I think of this topic, there's kind of a sigh. Okay, it's that time of year again, but we're going to work on tackling it together. Um, this is our plan for the afternoon. We have Brad and Jodi with us from MDE to provide an ABE funding overview. I took a look at the participant list so far, and I see many of us that have been around for a while, but it is never a bad thing to just hear those key terms and key concepts about ABE funding. Plus, there's some updates and some differences for this year. Um, as a way to kind of take maybe more of a dry topic and try to jazz it up a little bit for us, I have a Kahoot because who doesn't love a Kahoot? And I know that there's some competitive folks on this call today. So we'll review some key ABE funding terms with a Kahoot about halfway through. And then we're going to have some time at the end for budgeting strategies for the year ahead. And that's going to be discussion based. So it's not going to be me sharing resources. We're going to get into groups and discuss some concepts together. So that's where we are headed. Um, First of all, I wanted to make sure to acknowledge that this idea of the budgeting process and its implications for your program and your staff can bring up a lot of emotions. And actually, this slide was on the budgeting webinar last year, I think for the first time, but it's incredibly true, right? When we think about these kinds of difficult decisions that have to be made that often have human impacts. What staff can we keep on? What classes can we keep? The idea of maybe losing some students. This is really difficult. And when we asked the group last year to share in the chat kind of what emotions come up when they think about budgeting, these were some of the ideas that they had, some of the emotions that come up. I created this graphic that shows, some of us are thinking about budgeting as I'm really anxious, I'm worried, I feel a lot of pressure, I'm confused about this. And then there's sort of this middle ground that's about problem solving, looking for patterns, solving a puzzle. And then for some of us, the whole concept of budgeting is just something new and exciting and figuring out the puzzle. So you're somewhere on this spectrum, right, with the emotions that come up for budgeting. In addition to that, this year feels different. I think I saw a meme that in January was like, "Wow, it's been quite a year in the 30 days or the 31 days that we had in January." We've gone through a lot, right? And so it feels like there's added uncertainty and added pressure right now. And we recognize that can just add a lot of stress into your life, especially if you are a leader, an administrator, or an ABE manager, because you're hearing questions from your staff and from your team. We wanted to just acknowledge that and kind of hear from you all, hopefully in the chat, about where you're at. How does this year feel compared to others? And I'm going to just pause and I'll open up my chat box to see if anybody is willing to share. How was your year so far? Laura says, guesswork, a long year already. I agree with the length of that word. Patsy shared stormy. The economy is up, ABE attendance is down, part of the ebb and flow. Yeah, for some of us, we've seen some of these patterns before. And hopefully that makes you think like we can get through this. It was a roller coaster for sure this year. Yep, I think we can all agree with those comments. Feel free to keep sharing. Katie shared more pressure to feel hopeful somehow. I love the optimism there. I'm right there with you. Good. Well, thank you for those thoughts. Feel free to keep them coming in the chat. I'm going to pass it now over to our guest presenters, Brad and Jody, and I'm going to welcome them onto the video.
Thank you, Carly. My name is Brad Hasskamp, and I'm the State Adult Education Director here at the Minnesota Department of Education.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jodi Versaw. I am the Program Quality Specialist on the team here at MDE.
Excellent. So let's talk our adult education or adult basic education funding overview here in Minnesota. First off, it's important to kind of acknowledge how much money are we talking about here. So our system is roughly a $63 million system here in Minnesota. The vast majority of that, about 56 million, comes from state adult basic education grant funding. And then about 7 million comes from federal adult education funding. And so those are the two big pots of funding that we have. Note, unlike other types of educational funding, this is the total pot that we have no matter what. Like this is, it's passed by the legislature as a max amount pot of funding. It doesn't increase necessarily the total statewide pot, like ADM does for the K-12 budgets. Regarding the biggest pot, that state ABE funding, the state ABE funding is divided out into four major components as part of a formula in state statute. There's first the census or population count for that geographic area. Also for that geographic area, all the member school districts, it's the LEP, the K-12 Limited English Proficiency Count. And then also looking at the over age 25 without a diploma count from the census. And then we have from programs the total amount of contact hours from that prior year, that contact hour period from May to April. I'm sorry, no, yeah, May to April. And then on the other side, with our federal adult education funding, contact hours are really used to calculate the vast majority of that federal adult education funding. However, we do have some additional components with that federal adult education funding. First, there's accountability aid that pays for your your database license, as well as statewide distance learning licenses. There's also money allocated for regional transitions work, transitions funding. And there's also work or funding for services for students with low incidence disabilities. Okay, at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jody to talk more about the contact hours.
All right, thanks, Brad. So as Brad noted when going over kind of the formulas, how we divide up our funding, a lot of it has to do with contact hours, right? That is the one part of the formula that we have the most control over, and it's sort of the biggest part. So we're going to spend some time thinking and talking about contact hours. We've got a little more information for you than we did at web chat. I think probably many of you listened in web chat and we were talking about hours then. We've got a little bit of an update and then a little bit more information than we had time for on web chat. So just to start, we want to think about contact hours and state ABE funding. And so info in this slide is sort of saying where we're at right now. So this is the current year. In this year, the funding, the award amounts were determined using hours from the previous year, so May 1st, 24 to April 30th, 25. And in that time period, there was about 4.3 million hours. The total pot of funding that we're working with this year is about 55.5 million. And when we ran the formula, distributed all of that, that works out to a contact hour rate of $8.82. So that is sort of currently where we are at. So here is an update on where contact hours are at statewide. First of all, this is showing the first 8 months of the year, which was May through December, and comparing this current contact hour reporting period, which is May to December, and then to the May to December of 25 compared to that same time period in 2024. A few of these numbers changed a little bit since web chat. So if you're a very careful reader and you're comparing slides, you will note that some of these hours totals for some of these months are a little bit different, the more recent months. So this means this is a little bit more accurate. So what we can see when we look at this time period, again, only through December, that overall statewide hours, contact hours are up or have increased about 6.7%. So this follows a trend that we've seen for several years now, ever since, we took a big dip during COVID, and then we have started back up out of that dip. And so we have seen an increase every year for the last 3 years or so. And however, the increase is getting smaller. So three 2 years prior to this year, there was like a 15% increase, and then last year was more like 8 to 10%, and now what we're seeing here is lower. Yes, 6, 7, classic Carly. So what's different about this year, as we all know, you can go on to the next slide, Carly, is that January was not typical. So when we look at January, the contact hours from January of 2025, which was, a little over a year ago, compared to January of 26, there is a significant drop in hours. And again, that January total is a little bit updated since web chat, so hopefully a little closer to accurate. So when we just compare January this year to January last year, that is a decrease of almost 15%. So that's definitely significant. And we've heard from many of you that the federal enforcement that has been happening in our state has had a significant effect on your programs. Not everywhere, of course, and it maybe has had a deeper effect or more effect in some places than others, but definitely we know that many programs and many students have been affected, and the data shows that here. So when you take into account, when you add January into the whole year's total, or going back to May, that reduces the amount of the increase to a little just under 4% or 3.9%. So overall, for this contact hour reporting period, we are still looking at an increase, but it's definitely lower when you count January. So I think the big question, and I know you are all asking this question as well, is will February, March, and April look more like last year, or will they look more like January of this year? We don't have, even for February, I know February is over, but we can't be certain that what is in SID at this point for hours is, reliable enough to talk about it here today. So I didn't bring a February total for you. But I am curious, actually, if you're interested in sharing what you all have seen in your programs in February. Like, did you see the same? Was February similar to January, or have ours sort of started rebounding for those of you who had significant drops in January? So just curious about that. That is something, of course, we will be watching very carefully for the rest of the year, for the next couple of months, to see if the sharp decrease in January was pretty limited or if it continues longer. Okay, but I'm going to keep going. Yeah, interested in hearing about February hours if you have anything interesting to share. So we know that at this point of the year, you are definitely planning for next year. So we want to give you as much information as we have so to help inform any decisions or planning that you are doing right now. We don't have enough information for you to know um, exactly what your award amount will be next year. We wish we did. We know you wish you did, but we'll give you everything that we can so that you have as much information as as is available. So, in terms of the total amount of state ABE funding, that very likely that will be somewhere between level funding and a small bump of 3%. Probably as long as K-12 gets a bump in the state budget, ABE will also get that bump. So fairly likely we would get a 1 or 2% increase in the total pot of funding. And then, as we've been saying, the hours that in the time period we're in right now, so hours through April, the end of April of this year, are going to be used in that calculation for next year's funding. And just a reminder that generally, this is a bit of an overgeneralization, but it generally holds true. When statewide contact hours increase from one year to the next, that is predictive of the contact hour rate decreasing. And the opposite is also true. So if statewide contact hours go down, the contact hour rate increases. So this is just something to keep in mind and why it's a good idea for you to keep track of your increase in contact hours and how that compares to the statewide increase in hours. Yeah, thank you to those of you who are sharing in the chat about hours. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so here are some kind of possibilities that we are looking at for 26-27. When we're looking at hours, if we continue with something more like a 6% increase, which is what we were seeing from May to December, that would be about 4.5 million hours total. If that slows down, like what we were seeing in January, if it's only a 3% increase at the end of that time period, that would be more like 4.4 million hours. And then looking at how much funding will be available. If it's level, that's about 55.5 million. If we got a 3% increase, that bumps us over 57 million. And so likely it'll be somewhere in between those two. So running all those numbers as like the most likely kinds of scenarios, we can still say with some confidence at this point that we are looking at a contact hour rate that is lower than $8.82 for next year. It won't go down as much as it has in previous years. So if we look back 2 years, the contact hour rate was over $11 per hour. And then last year it went down to 9 something and then 8.82. So we saw kind of big amounts, big changes. And now that our growth is not as much as in those years, it's likely not to change as much. Of course, a lot depends on what happens in these next couple of months in terms of contact hours. This is a little bit of a side note, but I want to make sure it's on everybody's radar. There is LAN, Literacy Action Network, our professional organization, is once again advocating at the legislative level in our state legislature to increase the total amount of state ABE funding. They did have a bill that was written last year. It didn't get passed, but some really good advocacy work was started last year. And so LAN is continuing to advocate for this same idea to increase the total pot of state funding to about 66 million. That's an increase of 10 million or about 20%, which would be sizable, much bigger than the 1 to 2% that we would typically see now. And in this scenario, very important that as you point out, Tracy, the growth cap would get lifted. So that means it would allow everybody to grow substantially in terms of the award amount. It's likely that this is not the year that this will happen. It's possible. It's a little bit of a long shot, but we want you to know that that the proposal is still there, and that if you are interested in advocating for this, LAN is very interested in having you and folks getting involved. So I just kind of mentioned that as a side note that if that were to pass, that would have a big positive income impact on your budget, but definitely don't plan on it for this year. So it's also important whenever we talk about trying to predict and trying to estimate your award for next year, it is really important to understand that in addition to the four components of the state ABE funding formula that Brad walked us through, there are two caps that can change your final award amount, and if you're not aware of them, it can be disappointing and an unfortunate scenario. So we want to make sure everybody understands about two ways that your award amount could be capped for the upcoming year or for any year. So the first one is the contact hour revenue growth cap. I know some of you are very familiar with this one. This just says this is defined in state statute. So this is state law, and it says that for a consortium, the contact hour revenue portion of your award, so not the part that's associated with population and limited English proficient students in the K-12 schools, but specifically the part that is contact hour revenue, that part of the award cannot grow more than 11% or $10,000, whichever one is greater, from one year to the next. It's really important to know that this is not a cap on the number of hours. It is a cap on revenue. So we always encourage folks, don't be looking at what's 11% growth in hours. You want to be thinking about what would be 11% growth in that amount of revenue, because at this point, we don't know exactly the contact hour rate. So we don't know exactly how many contact hours would get you to 11% growth. So we never recommend sort of limiting your contact hours or limiting programming once you've reached 11% growth, because it's impossible to know until we run an initial calculation whether you might hit this. Tracy, good question. So Tracy asked, we multiply the award from last year by 1.11%. Yes and no. So in general, for most grantees, no. What you would do is take just the amount of contact hour revenue and multiply that by 1.11. And then you would get, that is the total amount you could get this year. Now, in the case of a grantee that is a community-based organization, there are some grantees who only get that contact hour revenue. And for those grantees, yes, that would be the way to do it. But for everybody else, which is the majority of folks here in the room, it would be just the contact hour portion times 1.11. So good question. Okay, and then the other important cap, which I know some of you are very familiar with this one too, is the $30 gross revenue per contact hours. So the way this one works is when all four parts of the state award are combined, so those four factors that Brad talked about, when those, at the end, we add those together and then divide that by the number of contact hours generated in that previous year. And that amount has to equal at least, that amount cannot be more than $30 per contact hour. If it is, then this cap is applied and the total award amount is just $30 times the number of contact hours. So, yeah, I'm going to pause just a second because I'm going to shift to talking about federal adult education, but I'm just going to take a pause in case there were any other questions about state funding. I think some folks in the room are old pros at this, but there's a lot of complication to our state formula. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So let's take a minute to talk about federal funding. And so this slide has some information of currently, like where are we currently at? So this is data from the current year. In terms of federal hours or hours that count for federal funding, there are about 4.3 million hours from the previous year. We've got a total pot of about 7 million of federal adult funding. And after you do all the math of the formula, the contact hour rate for federal funding works out to be 81 cents per hour. So that is the current contact hour rate. So, thinking about federal funding for next year, first off, I didn't put these words on this slide, but just want to make sure that everybody is aware that there was at one point some question about whether adult education would be funded at the federal national level this year, and that question has been resolved. So Congress did pass a budget that was signed by the president that does include full level funding for the nationwide system of adult education. So that was good news. And we are still waiting to hear from the Federal Department of Education exactly how much the total grant amount is to the state of Minnesota. They also have a formula that they run to divide their total funding up into all of the states and territories. So, but most likely, the pot is the same. So most likely, our state's award would be pretty similar. So somewhere around 7 million. So because that is a similar amount, and because we at this point it looks like we will see at least some growth in contact hours. Again, that likely means that for the upcoming year, the contact hour rate will be lower than 81 cents per hour. So also just one thing just want to touch on really briefly, because I know this may be something you are thinking about. I know folks have been worried about a big decrease in hours, and absolutely that is something that we understand does cause worry and stress. And we want to make sure that you know that there is a provision in state statute that can help prevent a horribly disastrous decrease. Basically, the service disruption clause can kick in if your consortium experiences such a big drop in contact hours that it would result in a more than 10% decrease in your revenue. So, for the most part, it's too soon to know whether any consortia will be in this scenario, but we're watching this closely this year and definitely will make an application available if it looks like there are consortia that are going to be close to that or hitting that 10% decrease. So more information about that if and when that becomes relevant. But just know that that exists and should prevent losses greater than 10%.
Jody, can I ask a question now, or do you want me to put it in the chat?
Good question. Are we okay with questions now,
I
Carly?
think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, we're kind of a smaller crew today. We're just 23 people
Yep.
here on the call. So I'm curious, what is the latest that this application would be opened for consortia to apply to it? So, for example, could we see in a situation that our fiscal year completely ends and then we apply for that past year? Or like when would the deadline be if
Yeah.
someone was going to apply?
Yeah. Good question. So, the timing for this would likely be that all grantees have to submit their annual application on June 1st to MDE. After that, after everyone submits that application, so we know everybody's contact hours, then we run an initial run of the calculation. So that initial calculation gives an initial preliminary award amount for each consortium. If in that preliminary calculation, if any consortium is hitting this 10% decrease, then that is when that would trigger, if that happens, we will open an application process. So, and then we'd have to turn it around pretty quick. So it would probably be open from mid-June for a couple, 2 to 4 weeks, depending. And then we would kind of make our adjustments. Then we run another second final calculation later in July or early August, and then we have final award amounts available early to mid August. So that would be the timeline. Probably it will, if it's open, it'll be open June to July. Yeah, good question. Let's see. Okay, I see a couple questions in the chat. Brad, are you unmuting to say
Yep.
something about hold harmless?
No, I was just
Oh,
offering to
okay.
unmute to help
Oh,
with either asking or answering the questions.
okay. Yeah, hold harmless. I don't believe there is really a hold harmless clause that applies to ABE funding. Would you agree with that, Brad?
Correct. Yeah, with the closest we have is service disruption, and that
Yep.
minimizes the decrease, but it doesn't hold harmless.
Yep, agreed. But um the other important and good thing that we have in state statute, thanks to some really great advocacy from by LAN a couple of years back now, is that our growth rate in our ABE funding total pot is tied to the K-12 growth rate. So if K-12 gets a little bump, we also get a bump, which is really great because before that, it used to be we were just flat, we were just the same every single year unless contact hours were growing. So that also helps. Okay. Oh,
Then
yeah.
do you, I can start the next question,
Yeah.
Kirsten's
Sounds good, Brian.
question.
Yep.
Okay. So, the reason that when you look up the state ABE entitlement report and you go consortium by consortium on the MDE website on those reports, you will sometimes see that those contact hour rates are different, and and they will never get above and beyond that 882, which was the statewide total. But you will see consortia that have a lower amount in some cases. The reason for that is that that consortium has hit the 11% growth cap for contact hour revenue. And so then their contact hour revenue is reduced, so it caps out at 11% growth. So like you're talking about Alexandria here, they were reduced down about 50 cents to hit that 832 mark. And then they were still, and they were that way they had only 11% growth in their contact hour revenue for the year. Jodi, I just want to confirm that I explained that correctly, or anything you'd add to that.
Yep. Yeah, that is exactly right. I was just trying to click through the ones that you listed here, Kirsten, and yep, the consortia that show a lower contact hour rate are because they hit the 11% growth cap. Just exactly what Brad said.
And then,
So,
yes, and then Kirsten, you're saying like, so that amount affects future years. So whatever you get this year in contact hour revenue, we multiply that typically by 1.11, the contact hour revenue, not the total award, and that will be the contact hour cap or max that that consortium could receive the next year. So there have been consortia that have had significant growth, and they do face that in over multiple years, and they will see that growth cap hit in consecutive years then in that situation. So it can affect future years. Yes.
yes. Yeah, that cap always starts with the current year. The current year's contact hour revenue adds 11%, and then that's the cap for the next year. So in that sense, if your consortium is growing, and maybe also in the scenario where you hit that cap last year, that's good math to do. Like take the amount of contact hour revenue from this current year, add 11%, and then you know that is the maximum that can be awarded in contact hour revenue for the upcoming year.
And again, just noting that we're talking about state funding, not federal funding.
Correct. Yeah, good. Thank you, Brad. Yeah, and that's a really good point, Kirsten, about hitting the growth cap one year and then the $30 per hour cap, and then COVID kind of messed with everything. So, yeah, yep, I hear you on that. It can be tricky once you hit those caps to get back out. That makes total sense. Okay. Getting back to federal funding, we have a reminder for you. This we also mentioned this on web chat, but just wanted to mention it again. There will be, like last year, there will be a very small, but a little bit of additional federal adult education funding that will be available to all consortium. It's about works out to about 4% of your original federal award, minus any regional transitions funds if you get those. We're doing this because it is redistributing underspending from 24-25, but we are adding it to this current year's award. So that means it does need to be spent by June 30th. We're working on award letters. Those will be sent out via email. They go to your Iowa, your identified official with authority. But we always make sure that the adult education consortium manager is also carbon copied. So if you are that person for your consortium, be looking for that. And then I think just one last, just a last reminder. Probably most of you don't need this reminder, but for anybody who does, June 1st is every year the date that the annual application is due. That application is for both state and federal funds. And that June 1st date is set in statute. So that is a very important one. You definitely want to make sure ahead of time that everybody who needs to be involved in that knows what they're doing and is on board. That application will be submitted in MEGS. And this will be the third year that we've been doing the MEGS submission. That's a newer grant system, but that has gone pretty smoothly for the last couple of years, so that's good. And we will be talking more about the annual grant application at our next web chat, which is coming up on May 6th. So yeah, I think that's it for the information we've got, unless there are other questions.
Yeah, we'll just pause. And I know we've had some questions in the chat and things, but now is another opportunity to ask Brad and Jodi. As Jodi was presenting, I was kind of thinking about the weather person on the news that has to predict and tell you, what to expect for weather for the next week. And that's what it feels like with, well, it could go this way, or it could be a 3% increase or a 6%. So that's what I was thinking about when you were presenting, Jodi. Yep, if anybody has a question they want to share, you can unmute and ask, or you can share something in the chat before we move on. Okay. Well, we'll switch gears a bit here. Oh, go ahead, Tracy.
So just to clarify and get it in my head, at this point in time, we should really look at, as far as state funding, going with what the total of what we had received this year, that 55 million, 56 million for state, and for federal, approximately that 7 million, right?
Yeah,
Just as a precautionary measure.
yeah, I think those are sort of conservative estimates, just to be safe. Those are the playing it safe estimates for sure. Yes. For federal funding, yes, I think 7 million is what we would expect. I think there is a reasonably good chance for state funding that we could get a small bump. But it would be no more than 3%, maybe more likely 1 or 2%. So,
But if a person hit the that uh, growth cap of 11%, there isn't, I mean, it's not like, woohoo, we're going to get some additional. I mean, so for example, right now, I'm estimating that I will get that 11% um, increase because I think I'm up
right.
like almost 20% or something.
Got it.
So unless something drastic happens, and fingers crossed that it doesn't, uh, even if we received that bump, unless the growth cap went away for the year and you can make as many contact hours as you want, I still would be capped at 11%, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is correct, Tracy. Yep, that is
Okay.
the right way to think about it. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, you guys, we're gonna do a quick Kahoot. I have 7 questions for you, and Patsy did share that in the chat. You can scan the QR code with your phone if you have it handy, or you can go to the website and enter that game code. I am just going to switch screens here. It looks like a couple people have joined us, but we'll give folks a minute here to scan the QR code or go to kahoot.it and enter the game code. And yeah, you can put your initials, you can do a nickname, you can do your full first and last name if you want. And this is just for fun. I have 7 questions and no need to get 100% or anything, but you're going to see some of the concepts that we heard about earlier. Thanks for joining. I'd love to see all these fun avatar animals here blinking at me. We'll get started in just a minute here. Okay. All right, we'll get started. So this is a Kahoot about ABE funding key terms. You're going to answer on your device. Planning and budgeting for the coming year makes me feel, and then there's 4 options with the different colors: anxious, excited, overwhelmed, or it's complicated. Just a couple more seconds to answer. So, one thing about this question is they're all correct answers, right? Because you can feel however you want to feel about the budgeting process. It looks like the most popular answer was it's complicated. Based on how quickly you entered it in, we've got some folks on the leaderboard here. Here's the next question. The proportion of state to federal funding for ABE in Minnesota. And then you have a couple different options. The slide showed differences between state and federal funding. Where do we get most of our funding in ABE? Oh, and I totally forgot to turn on the volume. What is a Kahoot without the Kahoot music? So, yes, almost everybody got this one right. It's approximately 90% state funding to 10% federal funding in ABE in Minnesota. So imagine what we would be able to do with only the federal portion, which is how some states run their adult education. We have the vast majority of funding coming from the state. There is our leaderboard. Princess Peach is on top. Next one, accountability aid, DL licenses, regional transitions, and low incidence disability. Where does that come from? Different types of funding are listed. Couple more seconds. Yep, almost everybody got this one. It is federal funding. Um, I am a regional transition coordinator, so that is kind of the key term there for me. But we talked about funding for SID, for DL licenses, and then low incidence disability. That comes from federal funding. My goodness, Princess Peach is on a roll here. Okay, this one has a description of a certain type of condition. A consortium's member districts have a population of 10,000 residents. So when you calculate that, that's an example of one of the four conditions for state funding. Which one would that be? Based on the number of residents? Yeah, it's the base population aid. The next couple questions kind of look similar to this, but have different examples and different answers. Couple more here. Princess Peach is still on top, but Mima is making a run for it, it looks like. If a program generated 20,000 contact hours, when you multiply it out, this is an example of which type from the list below. Oh, you guys, everybody got that one. It was contact hour rate. There was a little hint there in the question, wasn't there? But depending on how quickly you entered that, you've earned some points for that. Great job. Cool Breeze is headed up the leaderboard. If member districts report 350 LEP students, you make that calculation. That's an example of what type of aid. You guys probably get the gist of these questions, I'm thinking. There we go. K through 12 limited English proficiency rate. LEP. There is our scoreboard. I think this is our last question. If census data shows 2,000 adults aged 25 or up without a diploma, this is an example of what? There we go. Everybody got it. Over age 25, no diploma. So here we are at the podium. We recognize this from the recent Olympics. Here we are. Is it who I think it is? It's Princess Peach. Well done, everybody. Thanks for having a little bit of fun with that Kahoot. And hopefully it was a good review for everybody in a slightly different way. We are gonna keep rolling here. This last section, we're going to focus on budget planning strategies for the year ahead, and we're going to do that together. I have a set of four discussion questions, but this is going to be the two that we start with. I'll go ahead and read them. What aspects of the budgeting process feel most challenging right now? and what factors are driving those challenges. And then number two, how are you prioritizing programs, services, or positions when resources are tight? And what guiding principles help you make those decisions? These are really hard decisions that everyone is making right now. And so we're going to dig into that in our first breakout room. And so Patsy is behind the scenes working on some random breakout sessions. Once you join, you're going to introduce yourself. There might be a new name or a new face. We also would like you to share your birthday month and day, because after you talk through those two questions, when we come back to the group, the person with the next, like the soonest upcoming birthday, is going to be the reporter for your group. And of course, you don't have to recap the whole conversation, but give us a couple highlights, shared themes, things like that. So we are ready to start that first breakout room. Patsy, when you're ready.
Great. Just I have how many minutes would you just to make sure I have the right amount?
Yeah, let's do 12 minutes.
Okay. All right, everybody. Here you go.
Let us know if anybody needs help. We can help get you to the right room or welcome back. I hope you had a great conversation. I am wondering if our upcoming birthday folks would be willing to unmute and maybe just give a couple thoughts that came up in your discussion or something that you feel like you want to share with the group from your conversation. Yep, I see your note, Tracy. Thanks for being here.
So Katrina and I, believe it or not, are only a week apart in age, but I am the elder statesman. So
A week apart in birthdays?
yeah, I should say that. A week apart in birthdays. Yes. Katrina's way younger than I am. Yeah.
I wouldn't know who was older or younger.
Yeah,
It's hard to say.
So we come from two separate perspectives, right? She works in a community-based organization where they're sort of being given a message of like, hey, we will, try to generate revenue for you. So like dream big, plan big, and we'll go out and find money for you. But there's maybe some past practice and some messages that don't necessarily align together. So there's always a little bit of, hesitancy and reluctance. And I think, I'll maybe put a little bit of words into Katrina's mouth and she'll correct me if I'm misspeaking, but that like sense of like really wanting to be cautious, right? And being aware of sort of like how things have gone, it makes us more cautious moving forward. I, on the other hand, work in a school district. And so one of the things that we talked about was that, right, trying to meld from a community education perspective into like getting your district team to understand how adult basic ed funding is different. And also that it doesn't always align with, if you have a teachers union or, other unions that you're worried about contract obligations. So there's always a bit of a challenge there to try to mix those two pieces together. So it does end up being very crystal ball, right? Like there's so many guesses and that can be very stressful because you do your best. You go to meetings like this, you talk to your peers, you do the math, but it's still at the end of the day, a guess. And then the second question, we talked about how we're prioritizing programs. So one of the things that I've been talking about with my district leadership is that we're not like an adult enrichment program where if, a class doesn't fill, there's no community demand, you just don't offer it. We have I believe, an obligation for a spectrum of service to our community, so that even though on paper my ABE classes aren't as well, my basic foundational skills classes aren't as well attended as my EL classes, that it's very difficult to think about saying like, oh, well, we're just going to take the top X number of classes that are really generating a ton of contact hours, and if that means we stop serving or stop providing service to an entire segment of our community because they're not generating the same number of contact hours, feels like a philosophical mismatch from my personal perspective. And the thing that Katrina was adding was that as she thinks about prioritizing program or services, one of the guiding principles that she's using is this concept or idea of like how to not cut, but to embed. Like, how do you weave together opportunity and mix and match things in new or different ways to be able to sustain programming longer term?
I love that last concept. Yeah. Like we can still incorporate that and integrate it into some other options. Not cut, but embed. Yes. Let's do t-shirts. Anybody else from one of the other breakout rooms? Um, Emily did such a nice job reporting back. My goodness. It could just be one little nugget that you found useful or a commonality that you found with somebody else. Hi, Jessica.
Hello. So I have the soonest birthday in my group. And one of the things that we were talking about with the first one was just how challenging is the unpredictability of funding and all of, that and how, complex it can be and how, it just feels backwards or upside down because, we have to already hire, have our classes, all of that done before we even know what our budget is. So it's just, the funding part can just be very frustrating. And then prioritizing programs, we're just talking about how you can see like some classes will have the lowest numbers. For us right now, it's our GED program. We definitely, but I don't want to cut that. That's not something. And so we just need to look at, because some of the things that you might have the lowest contact hours are some of things that are incredibly important to helping people move forward in their life. And so just trying to figure out how we'll keep the programming even when maybe the contact hours aren't, as great as they are in other classes, but it is such a valuable service that we're providing. So we complained a lot, I will tell you. That's what we in our
Hey,
group. And not bad, like it was just real. And it was just the
yeah.
things that are super frustrating. And when you've been doing this for a little bit, it just sometimes feels like Groundhog's Day with every year. There's some other, the house is on fire. And then, we find out what our budget is and, it all seems okay. So,
Well, it sounds like you guys were able to just be real with each other
yep,
and vent together, and sometimes that's what you need.
yes.
I
So
get
I appreciated the conversation
it.
with both of them.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Well, what we're gonna do for the next two questions, because our group is getting a little bit smaller and we are kind of a little bit running out of time here, but I have two more questions and I thought we would just stay in the large group. So let's start with this question number 3 here. What strategies or tools have you found helpful for building flexibility into your budget so you can respond to mid-year changes or unexpected needs? Are there any things that come to mind for folks in regards to question 3?
I could just add that with learning platforms, when you can change the students as needed, it's a good tool for planning. Although, of course, you might still underestimate and you might have a need for more licenses. But when there are features like that, it definitely is important for our program. And then we can get creative that way. And depending on how we pay for it, if we pay for it with a general budget, then, we don't have to be like as concerned about any restrictions. But I would definitely, that's what comes to mind for that.
Thank you for sharing. What platform are you kind of thinking specifically about? Are there certain ones that you're using?
Yeah, so like IXL or Burlington English or, um, and yeah, it doesn't mean that we're like always maximizing our use, but like, we're able to just use them as soon as like we decide that we have the learners for it. And then with the metrics that the teachers review, then they can determine like, which students need it more, are utilizing it more than others. And then we can make adjustments.
Good, thank you. That reminds me of kind of a similar conversation I had with a few managers maybe a year ago about, I guess it was maybe on the distance learning committee where people were talking about, if you're trying to cut costs, you might look at the 10 subscriptions that you have for platforms and really figure out which ones are students using and which ones do we want to stick with and continue to pay for, and which ones should we let go of just if they're being underutilized or something as a way to save some money. Laura shared in the chat, I started purchasing known items needed this year, knowing that my budget will be lower next year. I will keep my program as an open and independent study concept and do what I can when I am able to at this point, helping with support and smiles. That's a great idea. Yep. If you've got a little bit of wiggle room and you can kind of purchase something that you can use next year, I'm maybe thinking it's materials or it could be licenses, maybe it's something else, just general supplies. Good idea. We can go ahead and move on to question number 4. This one I was very interested in. How are you communicating budget realities and decisions with staff and stakeholders to maintain transparency and trust? Any thoughts on what you've used to communicate with staff? Are you holding staff meetings where you're describing things? Is it emails? Are you walking around and telling people about budget decisions, or is it all behind closed doors? Have you seen things in the past that you don't necessarily want to continue with in regards to transparency? Laura shared, I share all info with me, myself, and I, staff of one. It will be scary when I start arguing with myself.
Yeah. Jessica and Kirsten?
Go ahead, Kirsten. I already spoke.
Well, I've just been thinking I've been doing this for a really long time. I've a lot of years of experience in ABE, and that can be hard because I want to do things the way I always have done them. I don't want to see our programs going away like they are, and we've been losing every year. The funding formula is not helping us anymore. So we have a lot of sites that have closed over the years. I've sort of tried to justify that by saying, well, but we're offering distance learning platforms. Okay, yeah. Now we're at the situation like, okay, our distance learning platforms are our second highest generator of contact hours in our consortium. We have 10 sites. We have 29 district members. Do I cut those? do we not do summer programming? We've always done summer programming because the message coming out of ABE for years was we're also a workforce entity. We're not just an education entity. So people aren't just trying to get ready for college or work, September through May, but we're on a guest all the time and it's getting extremely stressful. We don't know what our funding is for July, August. Sometimes it's late August, sometimes it's even, September before we really have a good idea. So you're on a wing and a prayer. We've done everything you can, you do everything you can. And then through no fault, through no real known reason, you can't do that again next year. So having been here so long, I guess it's been a drawback for me because I just had a conversation last night with my executive director about this. I said, I want this to still be a full-time program, for instance, in our largest place, but they're not sustaining themselves anymore. And so it's a risk. Everything's a risk, I think, is what I feel right now. And I'm really struggling a bit with that.
Well, thank you for sharing. And I'm sure there's many others on the call that have, these same struggles and concerns. And yeah, it can seem like there's no right answer or no way to win in any of this. And
Yeah, he made the comment to me yesterday, but 30 years ago when you started, you probably didn't even have computers in classrooms to be able to do online classes. And so you gotta like look outside of how we've
sure.
always done things. But yeah, like where do you rob Peter to pay Paul? I don't know anymore.
I hear
Yeah,
you,
there's
Kirsten,
just,
on that. That is a real struggle, and I think that's why some consortia carry over like some of their state funding into that quarter five to help kind of create a little bit of a cushion there if they're able to, right? But not everyone's able to do that, and you can also kind of hold back too much where it might be too hard to spend it if you don't have the staffing in place, and you could get into kind of it could be challenging in another way. Um, yeah, it just feels like with all of the need, there aren't enough resources to match all like and pay for everything that's needed. Yeah. I hear that 100%, Kirsten. I wish I had a better answer for you, but yeah, unfortunately.
any other thoughts related to question 4 about communicating budget decisions?
So I will just say that for me, I'm a small consortium. There's only four of us, and so I'm very open with them. Usually this time of year, because if I'm open in September, well, I don't really have the data for that, and so this time of year is when we really start. I start looking at things, and what I've learned to do is I just make a guesstimate, and I've also learned to not say too much because if the budget is really, really bad, people start to freak out about it. But I always stay with integrity. I always make sure that I'm communicating with everybody honestly about what the budget is and where we are. And so I just say this is what I think is going to happen, but really we never know until August. So that's pretty much how I do it. But I always talk to my staff about it because these are people's livelihoods. This is your health insurance. This is your job. This is, where you're spending most of your time. So people need to know, what's going on with that and what the situation is.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like the weather person predicting the weather again. Well, thank you all for talking in your small groups and sharing here in the large group. Um, it is a tough time in ABE, and it's great to hear from all of you and to be able to connect and share over that, even though there are immense challenges going on. Laura shared, school districts are still unsure about funding and priorities. I am trying to not stir the pot because I don't want to be pulled into covering their areas of deficit and thus cause ABE to have less programming hours. Yeah, there's just so many variables, and school districts have certain variables, and community-based organizations have others, but there's a lot of common challenges there. I am going to just wrap up quickly with a couple of notes about resources. I wanted to point out that the updated mnabe.org website does have a section focused on grants and funding. So if you have people that you work with that maybe are new to ABE and just need the basics, you could always share this recording with them. But there are also some resources that you can read on the website about funding for ABE. A couple of the slides noted some Minnesota statutes regarding ABE funding. And I put that in here because you never know. Somebody might want to do a deep dive and check that out. And then also there is a section in ABE Foundations, the Canvas course on funding. I just took a little snapshot of what it looks like. It has some scenarios. It talks through the funding formula. Some of the same information that we covered today is in that course. So that's another great resource. And then something to think about, maybe nothing comes to mind right this moment, but if there is something more, a resource, a tool, a set of questions, maybe there's something that can be created to help other ABE administrators in regard to information about funding or making a plan. So I just wanted to kind of float that question out to you to just start brainstorming. And you'll see a similar question in the evaluation that will be sent out in the follow-up email. But there is, things that we can work on that would better support you in the work that you're doing. The other thing that I wanted to point out is the Atlas announcements and future PD document that Patsy will share the link to this in the chat. This has information about the MNABE YouTube channel, all of the asynchronous Canvas courses, but we are approaching a few upcoming trainings. Just starting tomorrow is the Leadership Book Club. If you are able to get a copy of the book and join us, feel free. The registration link is here. If you can't make the meeting tomorrow, we meet again April 8th and May 13th, and Patsy is leading the discussion there. I also wanted to point out, if you haven't heard, that the April 17th event, which we were planning on doing a Metro Regional, is now going to be a spring statewide virtual conference, and the registration is available. Yes, sorry, I have a typo there. That was me. I just registered today, so feel free to share that and register. Now we can all join that free virtual event. And then if you are located in southern Minnesota and you're available in May, we are holding the South Regional event in Mankato. Registration is not available quite yet, but it will be soon. And then there was an email just the other day about Summer Institute, which is going to be virtual. They're now accepting proposals. So if you have a great idea or a strategy that you want to share during Summer Institute, feel free to check that out. Otherwise, I will be sending out a follow-up email in the next day or so. It'll have a PDF of the slides, the evaluation, which you'll complete to get your CEUs. And just thanks for joining today. Thank you to Brad and Jodi for presenting as well.